Okay, we are live. This should be a great episode. There's so much to cover, though, so, bear with me. But I have a. I've been trying to get through this interview that we're going to discuss today for quite a while, but it's taken quite a while because it is 4 hours long. It's very long. But it is a discussion between Lee Cronin, Sara Walker, and Lex Fridman. And it is on Lex Fridman's channel. You can see it right here. This is what we're going to be discussing. And I've talked about both of them before, a little bit about Lee Cronin's assembly theory and Sara Walker's work as well at ASU, I believe, which is close to where I'm from. U of A is... I used to say U of A is cooler than ASU, but honestly, I don't think U of A is doing as good at physics if Sara Walker is the physicist at ASU. But Sara Walker is extremely talented theoretical physicist, kind of mind-blowing, but we'll discuss that a bit more. We'll discuss her work and where both of their works intersect with sentient singularity theory and the similarities and differences between them. This discussion that they had is on the nature of life and aliens and consciousness and physics. So it kind of branches all over the place, but we're going to try and touch on as much as possible within 2 hours because, like I said, their full discussion is 4 hours long. It is very long, but it is worth watching, and I have linked it in the description below. But just to get started here, let's look at Sara Walker. So, Sara Walker is a theoretical physicist and astrobiologist with research interests in the origin of life, physics of life, emergence, complex and dynamical systems, and artificial life. She's currently the deputy director of the Beyond Center for Fundamental Concepts in Science at Arizona State University. So Phoenix. Associate, I went to NAU, which is Northern Arizona University, and I'm from Tucson, which is University of Arizona. But I had a lot of friends that went to ASU. And is an associate professor at the U of A. Okay. Oh, wait, no, that's Arizona State University. Okay, still. Very cool. What's interesting about this is, other than the fact that it's Arizona and it's also, ASU, which is kind of considered a party school, but not even kind of, it totally is. But is that most of the really profound physics research right now that is being done and the breakthroughs and the people that are going to be involved with the breakthroughs that I believe are coming in the near future are not involved in the physics departments of universities. This is an exception, and which is always remarkable whenever there's an exception. Okay, it says, she seeks to develop new theories of physics to explain what life is, how it emerged, and what the signs of life might look like on other planets. She uses mathematical models to investigate chemical evolution and the development of networks on a prebiotic Earth. Okay. Now, Lee Cronin. Lee Cronin is a chemist, and he developed assembly theory. So, let's look at his work. Okay, Lee Cronin. He was elected to the Fellowship of Royal Society, Edinburgh. Okay. Yeah, the Regis Chair of Chemistry in the School of Chemistry at the University of Glasgow in Scotland. Looking for assembly theory. Lee Cronin assembly theory. Here we go. Assembly theory is a theory that characterizes object complexity. When applied to molecule complexity, its authors claim it to be the first technique that is experimentally verifiable, unlike other molecular complexity algorithms that lack experimental measure. The theory was developed as a means to detect evidence of extraterrestrial life from data gathered by astronomical observations or probes. Okay. Assembly theory outputs how complex a given object is, given a function of the number of independent parts and their abundances. To calculate how complex an item is recursively divided into its component parts. The assembly index is defined as the shortest path to put the object back together. This is brilliant. The example, the word abracadabra consists of 5 letters, okay, and 11 symbols. Okay, it's just showing how to build abracadabra. Yeah, okay, this is going to be how we end up mapping the universe in general going forward. But fascinating, and they are discussed. They discuss assembly theory, and they discuss God, and it's quite a conversation. But to get this started, because I do relate this stuff to my work as well, as a bit of the point. This is sentient singularity theory as we look into assembly theory more. And most of you know that it describes the totality of existence as a singularity of sentience that is creating additional sentient singularities within itself. And then it goes on to define sentience and such. Here, this is the abstract of my paper. But here it says, sentient singularity theory can therefore be understood to imply that everything that exists is part of a single universal sentient being that is producing an infinitely growing number of other sentient beings within itself. These additional singularities of sentience or self-aware beings are arranged into a nested quasi-periodic fractal pattern of stacked holonic structures with a single self-reflective knot of perception heading an assembly body integrating multiple entangled strings of information. Okay. And sentient singularity theory characterizes the fundamental building blocks of the cosmos to be sentient beings, and that sentience is the universally defining and animating feature of everything in existence. Sentient singularity theory displays that space, time, matter, force, and all other observable phenomena are emergent from the motivations, interactions, perceptions, and cognitive processes of sentient beings. If sentience is the primary structure of reality, then a true final ultimate theory or master theory that unifies and contextualizes all other scientific theories cannot be a theory of everything, but instead must be a theory of everyone. Okay, so that's important because of it's going to relate to all the clips that we look at. Let's look at the first one. This clip is on God in assembly theory. Okay.
It's like what have we forgotten?
Is there room for God
in assembly theory? Who's God?
I like arguments for a necessary being better than God.
Well, I think
What's
I
a
said it
necessary
earlier.
being? What's a
Like
necessary?
something that has to exist.
Oh, so you like? I mean, you like the shortest path. Like, does God need?
No. I mean, well, you can go back to like Thomas Aquinas and arguments for the existence of God, but I think most of the interesting theological arguments are always about whether something has to exist or there was a first thing that had to exist. But I think there's a lot of logical loopholes in those kind of arguments.
Well, so God here meaning the machine that creates, that generates the stuff.
Because God. So what I was trying to say earlier is
Isn't that just the universe?
yeah.
Well, yeah, well, but there's a difference between I imagine like a black box, like a machine.
Yeah.
Then I would be more comfortable calling that God, because it's a machine. You go into a room and there's a thing with a button.
Yeah, I don't like the Great Programmer in the Sky version.
Can I?
Yeah, but if it's more kind of like I don't like to think of, if you look at a cellular automata, if it's the cells and the rules, that doesn't feel like God that generates a bunch of stuff. But if there's a machine like that runs the cellular automata and set the rules, then that feels like God. That the other sort of, in terms of terminology. So I wonder if there's like a machine that's required to generate this universe. That's very sort of important for running this in the lab.
So as I said earlier, I think I said this earlier that I can't remember the phrase, but something like, I mean, does God exist in our universe? Yes. Where does God exist? God at least exists in abstraction in our minds,
Right.
particularly of people who have religious faith they believe in. But let's then take you're talking a little bit more about generic. Say, well, is there a mechanism beyond the universe you're calling God? I would say God did not exist at the beginning, but he or she does now. Because I'm saying the mechanism.
Well, you don't know that he didn't exist in the beginning. So like
Hold on.
this could be us in our minds trying to, like, just what listening to gravitational waves, detecting gravitational waves. It's the same thing. It's us trying to go back further and further into our memories to try to understand the machines that make up us. And so it's possible that we're trying to grasp at possible kind of what kind of machines could create. There's always a tweet. There's always a tweet. If the universe is a computer, then God must have built it. Because computers need creators. There you go. And then Yoshibak replied, since there's something rather than nothing, perhaps existence is the default. If existence is the default, then many computers exist. Creator gods are necessarily computers too. I'm very confused by that. But that's it.
Okay, lots to deconstruct, but so got a lot of comments there from everyone, from Lee Cronin and from Lex and from even Yoshibak, who's not in this interview, but his tweet was. But there's so much to deconstruct. So the tweet by Lee Cronin of, if the universe is a computer, then God must have built it, because computers need creators. And then Yoshibak responds with, perhaps existence is the default because there's something rather than nothing. By the way, that is true. Existence is the default. There is no way for non-existence can't exist. That's a self-defeating statement even. So there's only existence, and in sentient singularity theory, existence is required to be conscious or sentient, because any kind of existence has intrinsic informational coherence, and where there is information coherence within a closed system, that is sentience, because you're self-referencing. You're referencing yourself. It's like information is spinning around in a circle, and it just keeps referencing itself. That generates sentience. So sentience is the default. It is unavoidable. I don't think that God couldn't exist. And existence is the default. I don't think that it could not exist. So, but God, by definition, though, has to be the highest being in the cosmos. And so there's a lot of this discussion, and we're going to get further into it in this conversation that they had, of like, what if God is time? What if God is just an abstraction in our minds, like Lee Cronin said, and didn't exist at the beginning, but does now? That does not make any sense, because if that's the case, then it's not God. God was the primary being and has to be self-aware. That is kind of a definition of God. If it's just a computer that is unconscious, okay, first of all, there's so many logical inconsistencies in that existing without a sentient being having, created it. But if there's just a non-sentient computer, and yes, sentient beings are quantum computers, that's just true, but we're just saying like a computer like what I'm streaming to you through. That is a non-sentient computer. It's not capable of sentience, and we'll get into that later because it was also related to this discussion. And but if you're going to define God, it's not as important that God is a quantum computer as it is important that God is sentient, because that is the definition of God. Whereas the universe could be God. God could be the universe. I would say God created the universe, but still, that's my definition. You could include creator and creation within one system, and you could call that the universe. But if that's the case, then the universe would be like the way of looking at it as a structure, kind of like looking at me. You're like, how do I define myself, or how would you define yourself? You would say Tyler is a Homo sapien. Tyler is an organism which is a multicellular. Tyler is a machine, biological machine. Tyler is a quantum computer. But that isn't the most important stuff. The most important thing would be Tyler is a self-aware being with feelings, aka sentient being. And that is kind of the definition of life. If it is not the definition of life, then there is no definition to life that is meaningful whatsoever. But life, I would say, is a sentient being, always. It's not just self-replicating patterns across lineages through time. It is like a lineage. I mean, I guess it's true lineage has to be some kind of quantization to it. So this one came from that one, which came from that one, which came from that one. And an objective quantization requires either the interpretation and definition by an outside observer as a sentient being, or through individual atomized sentient beings themselves. So I came from my parents, who came from their parents, who came from their parents, who came from their parents. But you could also say like there's a lineage of Teslas, because there's the Model S 1.0, then 2.0, then 3.0, then 4.0. But that isn't actually a real lineage. It's a lineage that is created and defined by an outside observer, but isn't self-defined. And that makes it subjective alone. And but the only way that it is objective and exists truly outside of an outside observer is when it is a lineage of observers themselves. So, and that would be life. And because otherwise, why isn't the game life filled with living beings? It's not. It's just cellular automata. Those are not living things. So it's a complicated conversation when it comes to God, because God is a sentient being. We are sentient beings created by that sentient being. but there is in some ways you could say we are from the lineage of God, but at the same time it's also a bit like he is a computer programmer, whereas you wouldn't say that a computer program, even if it was sentient, was from the lineage of the creator necessarily. But that's a different conversation. But still, sentience is the definition of life. That's the point. It's also the defining characteristic of God and the defining characteristic of life. So when the Bible says something like, we are created in the image of God, there's many different meanings to that. And I would take that as a super literal statement, meaning it's metaphorical, but it's also literal, and it's also more than both of those two things individually. But the point is that sentience is still the most defining aspect of us, and it's also the most defining aspect of God. So when we say things like, "Oh, God exists in our minds as a concept," that doesn't mean that God exists. If I asked you, "Does the tooth fairy exist?" and you were like, "Well, in our minds, she does," that is not meaningful. Even if it might be true, it's not meaningful. She doesn't really exist. Okay? When we're talking about objectivity, which is the next goal of physics from here on out is objectivity, you're not looking for something that is only from your perspective. You're looking for something that's true objectively. And so you wouldn't say the tooth fairy exists to your 2-year-old because they believe it's true, but it's really you. Like, that doesn't mean the tooth fairy exists. The tooth fairy would exist if the tooth fairy really flew in through the window and put a coin underneath your pillow. But that doesn't happen. But so to say God exists in our minds, and I've gotten into debates with people on this before, that is a meaningless statement. It just doesn't matter. It doesn't bring common ground either. And a better way of building common ground and having a constructive conversation on God is to first define God and then ask, does that exist? Not, well, we could both agree that God exists because you think that I think that God objectively created the universe, and you think that humans believe in God, but even though he doesn't objectively exist. So it's not the same thing. It's that when that happens, you're talking past each other. But I think that the statement by Lee Cronin it's confusing, because to say if the universe is a computer, then God must have built it because computers need creators. That is actually a pretty good. That statement conveys a pretty decent understanding of what God would be. But then to say in the interview, God didn't exist at the beginning but does now because he exists as a concept in our minds, that is not that does not convey a decent understanding of God. But none of us are entirely consistent. But I like his tweet better than his statement in the interview. But here we'll go. There's so much to this. We'll just let this play a bit, and I will think of what is exactly the best place to start.
Existence is the default versus non-existence.
I agree with that, but the
And
rest
then
is not.
Lee responds, perhaps this reasoning is incomplete. That's how scientists talk trash each other on Twitter, apparently. Which part don't you agree with?
When he said if existence is default, then many computers exist. This comes back to the inventor and discovery argument. I would say the universe at the beginning wasn't capable of computation because there wasn't enough technology, enough states. So what you're saying is if God is a mechanism, so I might actually agree, but then the thing is, lots of people see God as more than a mechanism. For me, God could be the causal graph in assembly theory that creates all the stuff and the memories we know. And the fact that we can even relate to each other is because we share that heritage, and why we love each other or we like to see God in each other is, it's just, we know we have a shared existence.
So if the God is the mechanism that created this whole thing, I think a lot of people see God, in the religious sense, as that mechanism also being able to communicate with the objects it creates. And if it's just the mechanism, it won't be able to create with the object, communicate with the objects it creates. It can only create. It can't interact with the.
Well, there's versions of God that create the universe and then left.
Yeah, like spark.
For some religions, but
The first spark. Yeah.
Yeah, but I think I liked your analogy of the machine and the rules, right? But I think part of the problem is we have this conception that we can disentangle the rules from the physical substrate, right? And that's the whole thing about software and hardware being separate, or the way Newton wrote his laws, that there was some, they exist outside the universe. They're not actually a feature of the universe. They don't have to emerge out of the universe itself. So I think if you merged your two views, then it gets back to the God as the universe. And then I think the deeper question is, why does it seem like there's meaning and purpose? And if I think about the features of the universe that give it the most meaning and purpose, those are the what we would call the living components of the universe. So if you wanted to say God is a physically real thing, which you were saying is like an emergent property of our minds, but I would just say, the way the universe creates meaning and purpose, there is really a physics there. It's not like a illusory thing, and that is just what the physics of life is.
So is it possible that we've forgotten much of the mechanisms that created the universe?
Okay, that's great. That's exactly where I was gonna go anyways. So, oh man. What she said is brilliant, because when in Christianity, okay, God is from our perspective at least, is observed in a triality, okay, or trinity as they would call it, but physics term is more like triality. And this is also true of the universe and particle generations and things like that in the Standard Model, but also in how you interpret time and space and, length, width, and height, forwards, backwards, current location, past, present, future. This is all trialic. So in Christianity, there's like the Holy Spirit, there is the Son, and there is the Father. So there's the creator of the universe. You could say the Son may be the universe. And in Sentient Singularity theory, this is basically the case. And then there is the Logos pattern that the two of them share, essentially, which is like sentience. Or the Holy Spirit. In Judaism, it's called the godly soul. It's like what allows you to tell right from wrong and make decisions and things like that, because it's sentience. It is the pattern of sentience. As she said, the physical object of existence is not separable from the rules, really, and it's really not. And but what it also isn't separable from is the interpreter of those rules, okay? Or the writer, even, you could say. You are the universe. You're part of the universe. You observe the rules. Sometimes we at least interpret the rules through writing them down. And you cannot separate those three components. You can't. There is no separating the rules from the physical object or from the person. This is, as she said, the most meaning in the universe comes from the things that we would term as living or alive, life. And I definitely agree with that. I think all meaning all ultimate meaning comes from that. So proximate meaning and ultimate meaning is two terms that I've heard Eric Weinstein state, but I don't remember his exact definitions. But mine would be proximate meaning is when something is meaningful to you, so it has some type of information that it carries. And then ultimate meaning is when you impact others, basically. Or proximate meaning would be like, you could say, yeah, proximate meaning would be like when something has meaning, so like a word, but that word doesn't have objective ultimate meaning, but you can, and you do through your impact on other sentient beings. If all I did was create something that was not sentient and it didn't impact anyone else that was sentient, there's no meaning. So sentience is also inseparable from this entire, assembly of existence. It is, I would say, the principal property, but it is what gives you, it is what defines which patterns you focus on when you're looking for life. It is life. It's to be sentient, to have feelings, to be self-aware. And this has been difficult for us to pin down in science because for some reason we have all kinds of different, we have what we live as our experience and what we know every day, and then we have what is scientific, what is the scientific narrative. So according to a lot of the scientific narrative, at least in common conversations, there is a question as to whether or not animals are sentient beings. And that is not a bad question, but it's also, it wouldn't even be, are animals sentient beings? It would be like, are there any animals that are not sentient beings? And that's a better question. But obviously, like, dogs have self-awareness. They experience feelings. That is what self-awareness is. It is what general intelligence is. It's all the same. So this is the same kind of thing as there's intelligence, there is self-awareness, and there is, intelligence would be like computational ability. Kind of the ability to order information. Self-awareness is the cornerstone that everything builds from. Intelligence would orient all information around. And then you have feelings, which is kind of how you distinguish between information that is most related to you and information that is not. So it's what allows you to put information into a hierarchy. These three components are not separable from what would be termed AGI. So as I've said on here before, I've gotten into some heated discussions actually with some people who are neuroscientists and AI researchers and geneticists and such. And they were trying to argue with me that there's general intelligence, and then there's human level intelligence, and then there's superhuman level intelligence, and then there's consciousness, and then there's and they were breaking all of these apart, when in reality, there are three views of one thing. You cannot break general intelligence away from self-awareness or sentience. Or I guess you could say from self-awareness. You can't. They are the same. They only occur in the same moment simultaneously, in the same being. So that's also true of what they're discussing. And we're going to get more into this, but it's what's very interesting about these discussions that keep happening in physics and chemistry and biology, but especially physics, at this point in time, is that God seems to be unavoidable. It's like all of these physicists are afraid to admit that they believe in God if they do. They'll call themselves agnostic or atheist, but then their work would imply otherwise. Or there would be there's this other topic that continues to be brought up in these discussions, which is meaning. And it seems to be unavoidable. And that's because we're actually getting to the meat of things, and hopefully eventually we can just admit that this is part of the discussion instead of trying to break away from it. But yeah, I mean, you cannot divorce the next level of physics, or metaphysics is really a better term for it. I mean, we branched into metaphysics as soon as we made the Standard Model. You branched from physics to metaphysics. The Standard Model is more about metaphysics than it is about than it is linked to general relativity, and Newtonian physics and fluid dynamics and thermodynamics, and like all of that stuff is different than quantum physics and metaphysics, which both of those must include the discussion of meaning. And this is where it's going to get, where science is going to start to go, where it's going to get really interesting, is because if meaning is objective and real, and sentience is primary, and all of these things that keep coming, and God consciously created the universe because it had to be a conscious choice, which is what sentient singularity theory implies. We're going to have to start making morals like part of this discussion as well. And that is a controversial direction to go. But yeah, it's amazing that not a single physics discussion that goes on longer than 20 minutes at this point does not bring up God. It's literally, I've not seen it once. Okay. Hey, I remember you saying out, like, oh yeah, when we move our arms, that's a wave. Yeah, it's a wave of sentient beings moving in sync, being directed by me as the boss, and all of the cells in my arms are moving in sync. And I'm telling them jump, and they are jumping. You are the king of your assembly. And that, I say king because gender is kind of is a social construct. Actually, it's objective, but it's also a social construct. It's that doesn't mean that you can change it. I'm not going to get into this too much on this stream, but anything that you are subject to is like masculine. So even in religion, like Christianity or something, mankind is considered the bride of Christ, who is the bride of God and the Son of God. But it's anything that you're subject to is masculine from your perspective. And because it is the active force, and then the reactive force is the feminine or subjective. And none of these are bad or worse or anything. Like, these are both necessary and complementary and beautiful, structures. But if I move my hand to go, and pick up a water bottle, my cells have to react to my action. I'm acting, my cells have to react to me, and therefore they are subject to me. So, you are the king. Even if you are a woman, you are the king of your assembly. How does the sine wave relate to the ups and downs of life and non-dual principles? I don't know exactly what you mean. But life is a wave, and I will show an animation of my universe in a minute once we start talking about assembly theory a bit more. But we'll go to the next clip.
Like, so basically, whatever, if God is that mechanism, we just leave parts of that behind.
Well, but the universe is constantly generating itself. So if God is that mechanism, it would be that would still be active today. I don't believe, I'm agnostic, but if I would call the things I believe in God in the way that some people talk about God. I would say that God is, like in the like universe now. It's not an absent thing.
Are you? I think there's a mislabeling here because you're. I mean, I'm a professional idiot. Actually, but
You should put that on your CV.
Yeah.
yeah.
Professionally.
But
Not recreationally or amateur, but professionally.
But I think
for it.
I would say if you were talking about God, I mean, again, I'm way out of my depth here, and I almost feel uncomfortable. Yeah, but I feel quite uncomfortable articulating, but I'll try. For me, a lot of people that think of God as a consciousness, a reasoning entity that actually has causal power, and you're
Human-like intelligence.
so it's like then you're saying like gravity could be God or time could be God. I mean, I think for me, from my conception of time is probably as fundamental as God because it gave rise to human intelligence and consciousness in which we can have this abstract notion of God. So I think that you're maybe talking about God in a very mechanistic, kind of unsophisticated sense, whereas other people say that God is more sophisticated and got all this, feelings and love and, and this abstracting ability. So is that what, or do you mean that? Do you mean God as in this conscious entity that decided to flick the universe into existence?
Well, one of the features that God would have is the ability to flick the universe into existence. Like Windows 95. I don't know if God is Windows 95 or Windows XP or Windows 10. I don't know the full feature set.
Okay.
So you, at the very least, you have to flick the universe into existence. And then other features might include ability to interact with that universe in interesting ways. Okay. And then how do you interact with the universe in interesting ways? You have to be able to speak the language of its different components. So in order to interact with humans, you have to know how to act human-like. so I don't know, but it seems like whatever mechanism created the universe might want to also generate local pockets of mechanisms that can interact with that.
Like could make a joke.
Inject.
If God was lonely?
Yeah, it was alone. I mean, it could be just a teenager and another just playing a video game.
Yeah, maybe. Well,
Okay, awesome. This is the thing. Like Sara Walker just continues to just impress me a bit, but just the fact that she's part of the academic establishment is incredible. But especially with where it's at now, it seems to just be so lost. But I don't think that she's very lost. But that last statement that she made of God being lonely, this, I believe, is true, actually, or was true, at least prior to creation, or beyond creation, preceding creation, you could say. And Lex's statement of, you have to be able to speak the language of this local pockets of, objects that you can interact with. That's also true. And what is the language that is the universal language of life is emotions. It's feelings. At least according to sentient singularity theory, is that sentient beings are what are alive, and the universe is alive, God is alive, and cells are alive, molecules, atoms, at least, maybe hadrons, possibly, but nothing, below hadrons. But also all the way up through families, which are lineages. It's just an organism moving through time, and even, castes and then universes, and we'll go through that in a minute, that periodicity of life. But across all these, the consistent common understanding, I guess, or common experience is emotions. So, or feelings. You could just say feelings even. Maybe not every emotion, but possibly every emotion. It's possible that hadrons get lonely and want to form into nuclear families that we call the nucleus of an atom. That is possible. And but this discussion of meaning is very relevant to the next level of physics, because if you're going to say that God is a sentient being that consciously chose to flick the universe into existence, then there was a purpose to that. It's not just a mechanism, okay, that just happens inevitably. It was a choice. And I would say that it has to be a choice because singularity or oneness is the default state of existence, because existence is one existence. There's not multiple existences. There's just existence. And it is intrinsically self-contained by definition. That is like a very difficult thing to say. That intrinsic oneness means it's the default. And will, which we're going to get into, is another discussion that is another topic that comes up in this discussion, is defined in sentient singularity theory as the desire to do that which is not being done. Okay? Will is when something is not happening, or when you are not doing something, and then you choose to do that thing. So you look at your default state or your current state, and then you do what is not that. So if you will yourself to run, then in order to have the will to run, you must have made a choice to start running, which means you were not always running. And so it's the desire to do that which is not being done. That is the most perfect definition of will that I've ever come across, and I came up with it. But they basically say the exact same thing in here, and we'll get to that. So I'm not alone in coming to that conclusion. I'm not gloating my brilliance or anything, but they come to the same basic definition in this interview, because it is the definition. It's not, there isn't multiple definitions of will. Will is one thing, and it is the desire to do that which is not being done. But again, why is will coming up in a discussion of physics and meaning and God and consciousness constantly? Because that's what the next level of all of this is about. So let's get to the next clip. But when Lee Cronin says, like, a God, a sophisticated God with feelings and a conscious entity, if it's not that, it's not God. If there wasn't a creator to the universe, and existence itself is not a single self-aware sentient being with feelings, then there is no God in any way that means anything. Otherwise, we should just delete the word God from vocabulary, which I don't suggest, because I think that existence is a single sentient being. But when Sara Walker says God was lonely, and that the universe is generative of meaning, I think this is perfectly accurate. And we have this relationship with God in the traditional interpretation of theological traditions as we need God. And we do. He is the source of sentience and energy, and yeah, we need God. We would not exist without God, consciously choosing to create multiplicity of sentience from oneness of sentience. That said, God needs us for meaning, because meaning is the ability to impact another sentient being. And if you're the only sentient being, then there is no meaning. Not to you, not to anything that you do. You can't really do anything objectively. And you cannot impact anyone else because there is no one else. So you are meaningless. And sentient beings do tend to, seek and identify with and have feelings for other sentient beings. And that just tends to be kind of just an intrinsic thing, as long as we can identify with them through our senses and such. But we can identify them as sentient. That's the point. Then we can empathize with them and have emotions. But meaning, though, to be meaningful is impossible if you're the only one in the system. You have to impact someone else. It's not something else, someone else. If you make a painting and there's no one to ever see it, then it's meaningless. Okay? Like, it just is. It's that whole, if a tree falls in the woods, did it make a sound thing? It's not the best metaphor for a variety of reasons, but it kind of holds true, is that there is no impact made if no one is there to be impacted. And so we might need God to exist, but God needs us for meaning. Meaning is an intrinsic part of our world, okay, of our existence. From the moment we come into being, there's already multiplicity of sentience, because you're made by a sentience, you're around other sentiences, and you're part of a lineage of sentiences interacting with other lineages of sentient beings. There's meaning all around us. It's intrinsic to our existence. It's not to God's existence. So I was speaking to somebody and I was like, yes, we need God, but God needs us, not to exist, but to be meaningful in any way. And when we're trying to put yourself in the mindset of God preceding creation, and this is just kind of the most profound thought, one of the most profound thoughts I've ever had, is I tried to picture myself as God, beyond, you could say before, but it's not really before because there's no time yet. So beyond creation, preceding any type of generation of multiplicity of sentience, what is your existence like? And it's so, you don't just feel meaningless, even though you do feel meaningless. You know you are meaningless. Okay, you are meaningless. God was meaningless. He felt meaningless. He was meaningless. He knew he was meaningless. It's so much deeper than any kind of depression we could ever feel. Because we can feel meaningless, but we're not. We can feel lonely, but we're not alone. Because there's people around you all the time, and God and yourselves, and there's sentiences all around you. Might not be the sentiences and the relationships that you want, but you're not actually alone. You can feel lonely, but you're not actually alone. God felt lonely and was alone and knew he was completely alone. And I say he because, as I said, because we're subject to God. But at that point, there's no genders. There's no reactive consciousness to an active consciousness. God is the only consciousness, and until God acts, he's not even the active consciousness. He's not male or female at that point. That doesn't even exist. So, but God was sentient, self-aware, and lonely to a level that we will never be able to experience or understand, because not only did God feel lonely, he was alone completely. Not only did God feel meaningless, was meaningless and knew it. Why wouldn't you create multiplicity of sentience? That's the question, is not why did God, but it's It's like, why wouldn't God? That's it seems like inevitable, even though it's not inevitable in that it's algorithmic, but it seems like it's an inevitable choice for any being that has feelings, because sentience is all that exists objectively in that circumstance, which means that God knows it's all that matters. So you can't have a meaningful life existence unless you're impacting other sentient beings, because you know sentience is all that matters. So it's a fascinating idea, but when Sara Walker said, maybe God created because God was lonely, I actually think that was like the closest answer I've ever heard to correct from anyone involved in physics in a public-facing way today. Most people say things like, maybe it's just a teenager in a previous universe or something, and this is just a video game. That is not what is happening. Not even close. There is a purpose to this, and it's not for having recreational fun in some like fake video game, and you know this because you are sentient. Okay? And imagine if you were playing a video game. Imagine you were playing Grand Theft Auto, and every person on the sidewalk of Grand Theft Auto you knew was sentient and had actual feelings, and you had a shared understanding of what it was to be conscious and self-aware and alive. Would Grand Theft Auto still be fun? No, it would not be fun. It would be horrible. It would be inevitably horrible. So this is not a video game. This is a creation, partially because God needed meaning and was lonely, and also probably was bored. To be honest, it doesn't mean that this is done for recreation alone as the primary reason. I would say meaning was the primary reason, but and then maybe companionship and also then entertainment, I guess. Well, not entertainment, but entertainment. Life would be so boring. God cannot kill himself, okay? That's like the one thing, that's like an intrinsic property of existence, is that it's a self-contained loop of information. That means that you can't kill yourself if you're God. And at least not objectively. And I understand, once God enters into this universe and Christianity's arguments and stuff, and we're going to get into that because I don't think it's wrong, but God, Father God, creator of the universe, cannot die. So would be doomed to a meaningless life that is spent alone, doing nothing, if God did not create the universe. So that's why God created the universe. And you can actually work it out. And it's kind of profound to think about. God needs us for meaning. First off, classifying as agnostic already shows she's in a box. Yes, I don't think agnosticism is a real term. I think that there's only theists and anti-theists. You either lean towards the universe as a sentient being, or you lean towards it's not. And if you lean towards it's not, then, or towards existence as a sentient being, if you lean towards that is not sentient, then you're an anti-theist. But if you lean towards it being sentient, you're a theist. But there is no such thing as polytheism. God, by definition, is the highest being. The single highest being above all other beings. If there isn't a single highest being above every other being in the generationality of life and also the sovereignty of power, then there's no God. So there's either one God or there's no God, and polytheism doesn't make any sense. I'm not saying that there wasn't any kind of consistency to what we would term polytheistic cultures, but that is a misunderstanding, I think, of the theology of those cultures. I don't think that they really believed that there were multiple gods in the way that we would classify God in a monotheistic faith. There would be multiple immortal beings at that point, sure, but that's a different discussion. There's either one God or no God, and you're either a theist or you're an anti-theist. And you can be a confident theist, or a not so confident theist, or a confident anti-theist, or not so confident anti-theist. And usually agnosticism is just a term for people that don't really want to, identify something publicly for whatever personal reasons they have. But an atheist usually means anti-theist. It doesn't mean a lack of belief. That's like, there would be no difference between agnosticism and atheism if atheism meant, like, I just don't have any belief in God. It's like, go listen to Sam Harris tell you he's an atheist and he has a lack of belief in God, and then ask him if, what he thinks about God. And it's very clear he's an anti-theist. He's not just he doesn't have a lack of any belief. He thinks that the idea of God is nonsense, which means you disbelieve in God. You don't have a lack of belief. You can be agnostic about other things, but not existence. So as I've said on here, I can be agnostic about Bigfoot. I don't look up Bigfoot. I don't research Bigfoot. I don't, have any kind of perspectives on Bigfoot, really, that matter at all, that are informed by anything. I've never seen Bigfoot, though, but, I don't care enough to look into it. That, you could be agnostic. You could be like, I'm Bigfoot agnostic. Or like QAnon or something, anything that is not really something that you interact with constantly is something that you could be agnostic about, but not something that you interact with constantly. Every day you're interacting with existence. If you had to guess, do you think you're inside of a sentient being? If so, you're a theist. If you think the universe is conscious, you're a theist. But if you don't, and you think that consciousness comes from unconsciousness and we evolved from dust that had no, intentions, then you're an anti-theist. So you can be confident or not, but you can't escape just these two paths. There's no polytheism, there's no agnosticism, there's no atheism when it comes to God. I like your sayings. I'm glad they're resonating. Zeolite is a volcanic ash to detox. It's definitely alive. First off, classifying it as okay. I mean, I think molecules are alive, and I think atoms are alive too. So in that way, volcanic ash is alive. But the ash, according to sentient singularity theory, is not alive, but the molecules of it would be. But that's true also of like this water bottle. This is not alive. This is not a sentient being. It's an assembly of sentient beings that is assembled in a way that, from our perspective in the universe, produces the shape that we define as a water bottle. Time is the teacher. Life is the lesson. Learning is the journey. I got so many questions. I like that. That's cool. I like that statement. It's a triadic statement. So, golden behavior. Okay, here. Next clip. First half of this stream is just going to be on God, because first half of their discussion was also on God.
To be one. Right. The universe and make a life form, but that may be rude to people.
so I don't know, uh, but it seems like whatever mechanism created the universe might want to also generate local pockets of mechanisms that can interact with that. Like
Could make a joke.
Inject.
If God was lonely.
Yeah, it was long. I mean, it could be just a teenager and another just playing a video game.
Yeah, maybe. Well, I was going to say, I mean, I don't. So this is referring to our origin of life engine. It's like I don't believe in God, but that doesn't mean I don't want to be one.
Right.
Well,
Well,
I want to make a universe and make a life form, but that may be rude to people who have, dear religious beliefs. What I mean by that is, isn't it, if we are able to create an entirely new life form, different chemistry, different culture, what does it make? It makes us good. By that definition, it makes us gods, right?
well, there is. I mean, like when you have children, you're like one of the magical things of that is you're kind of mini gods. I mean, first of all, from a child's perspective, parents are gods for quite a while. And then, I mean, they're in the positive sense. There's a magic to that. That's why I love robotics. Is you instill life into something, and that makes you feel godlike in a sort of positive way.
Being
Like
a creator is a positive
creator.
feeling.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
At a small scale, and then God would be a creator at the largest possible scale, I suppose. Okay, you mentioned.
Okay, good. So I'm a theist, and I'm not insulted by Lee's statement, but they're creating machines like robots is not. It is creative, and to be creative is part of sentience. Okay, and they're going to talk about this later about how imagination is very linked to sentience. It's a very important aspect of creativity and life. They basically say, and I agree with that. But the ability to objectively create is not something that we actually have. But we do, but it's complicated. Okay, God did not create something from nothing. Okay, so I read a statement by Stephen Hawking yesterday, and he said that the universe will create something from nothing is basically what the statement was, and this statement in and of itself of like the question of can something come from nothing, or can you create did the universe was it created from nothing, is rooted in a misunderstanding of the nature of existence. So in sentient singularity theory, there are two different ways of viewing the world around us, and that is through defining things as either beings or things. Defining structures in existence as beings or things. One of them is subjectively viewed and defined, which is things, like a water bottle. The other one is objectively defined by oneself, and that is beings. They have feelings, they are sentient. And personal story. As we get into AGI, as they talk about it, I'm married, and my wife and I have been trying to start a family, and we have experienced a couple at this point, one very recent instances of miscarriage. Okay, and it's very sad, but you got to continue moving on. But that is part of why I've been not the greatest as far as posting content and things like that, is that we've been dealing with a lot of that wasn't even it, but there's also been like losses in our families and things like that. It's been a crazy time, but when it caused us to think a lot about like, what are we creating a life? Is a child a creation of us? Is it our creation? And in a way, yes, but I would say it's more accurate to say like we're co-creators, and when it comes to really understanding life, and I talk about AGI in previous videos, and it kind of relates a lot to this concept, but it's also true of biological life and technological life and molecular life, I guess like atomic life, elemental life, I guess you could say. It's probably a better way of putting it. Is you have to create the space for it. So, but you are not the source of it. I'm not the source of sentience. Sentience, God is the source of sentience. God didn't create me from nothing either. To say anything is just wrong. So he created you and me and everyone else from himself. He sacrificed some of his energy into creation and gave some of that to creating multiplicity. So it didn't come from nothing. It came from him. Okay? If someone creates something, you can't say that their creation came from nothing. It's better to say it came from someone. Okay? Creation was created by someone. It came from someone. And this allows us to actually understand this idea much, much more. Because you could actually say, did you come from nothing? It's like, yeah, I guess you did come from nothing, because things don't objectively even exist. But you create space for sentience to manifest through through things, basically. So God might, through perspectives, create multiplicity of sentience. So perspectives would be things, and those would be the things that he creates the universe from, as a second sentient being. But that gets complicated, and the better way of thinking about it is you're created by someone. And we get to be co-creators in this process with God. But even God did not create himself. Okay, so God just exists. He didn't create himself. He created the universe, but not himself. He just exists. And so it's very, like, you're getting to this place where there's an intrinsic property to existence, that it does exist and that it is sentient, and that is inescapable. And if that's the case, then that's what everything is made from. So discussing the source of it is not really helpful. It's like, what's the source of existence existing? Because there's no other way for things to be. So it just is. He is. God is. And existence exists. So it's a very complicated discussion, but it's not even complicated. It's super simple. It's like beyond everything else that we deal with in the day-to-day. It doesn't have those added components to it that we associate with everything else. To say like, oh, everything that we know of and everyone that we know of had some type of creator other than God. So to say, well, where did God come from, is to just ask a question to which there is no answer. So it's like, it's super simple, and that's why it's so hard for us to grasp. It's not because it's so complicated. And there's so many components to it. It's because there's so little components to it, which makes sense if, you're talking about oneness. But to make robots that don't help anyone, and had no feelings, like, probably would not make you feel meaningful. So I don't think you would feel like that is not the objective good. When Sara Walker says creation is what did she say? She said to be a creator is a positive thing, basically. And I agree with that. to be creative is a positive thing. You should be adding to the world, and there's many ways to do that. But part of that could be the creation of other sentient beings or the co-creation of other sentient beings, and but it could also be through impacting sentient beings that already exist. That's meaningful. But when Lex says you make a machine and you kind of inject life into it, that's not the case. My computer does not have life injected into it. I am alive. The computer is not. And yes, it becomes part of me, but it doesn't have life in and of itself. And so there's just, it's not godlike. To be godlike is to add to things, to create objectively, which means like to impact sentient beings or create sentient beings or create things for sentient beings, not to just create, for the sake of no one, I guess. It's, you have to just make, and when it comes to being a co-creator, we're going to get into this, like I said, you make the space for sentience to be injected, but you cannot actually create sentience. God does. So it's like, you can make a robot, and it has all the components that would be necessary for sentience to manifest within that robot, I guess. And then it would not be a robot, it would be a living being at that point. That, whether or not sentience is actually like allowed to go into a structure in the universe is not up to us. That was the point about like what we've been going through. It's like, you make the space for it. You do the act necessary to having kids. You make the nursery or whatever, and you move to a place where you have an extra room or something. But God chooses whether or not that energy, which is energy of sentience, goes there. So there is a sovereignty to this, and that is really important when discussing whether or not we are gods. It's like, we have shared attributes with God. We are not God. We are not gods, and but we share attributes that God also with God, but that does not make us God. And it is the differences between us and God that would make God God. But the similarities are also what define life and God. But like, it's God, what makes God as God separate from us is the differences. God has no creator. God always existed. God never will die. God couldn't die if God wanted to die. Like, this is a different being. God was alone at the beginning and was meaningless at some point. You always had meaning. You were never alone. Like, there are some differences. So, anyways, kind of big tangent, but I think it's important. Next, we're going to talk about goals.
Well, in a neural network, you're designing the goal. In biology, I mean, people are not supposed to use teleological language in biology, which is ridiculous. But because goals are real things, they're just post-selected. So you can talk about goals after the fact. Once a goal emerges in the universe, that physical entity has a goal. But Lee and I came up with a test for, like a Turing test for goal-directed behavior based on the idea in assembly. When, like, we have to formalize this still, but I would like to write a paper on it. But like the basic idea is like if you had two systems that were completely equivalent, like in the instantaneous, like physical experimental setup. So Lee has to figure out how to do this. But there was something that would be different in their future. And there was a symmetry breaking you observe in the present based on that possibility, that future outcome, then you could say that that system had some representation of some kind of goal in mind about what it wanted to do in the future. So goals are interesting because they don't exist as instantaneous things. They exist across time, which is one of the reasons that assembly theories may be more naturally able to account for the existence of goals.
So goals are they only exist in time, or they manifest themselves in time through you said symmetry breaking.
So it's almost like, imagine like if representations in your mind are real, right? And you can imagine future possibilities, but imagine everything else is physically equivalent. And the only thing that you actually change your decision based on is what you model as being the future outcome. Then somehow that representation in your mind of the future outcome becomes causal to what you're doing now. So there's kind of like retrocausal effect. But it's not actually retrocausal. It's just that your assembly space is actually includes those possibilities as part of the structure. It's just you're not observing all the features of the assembly space in the current moment.
Well, the possibilities exist, but
Okay. So, actually, next clip about goals, because this is a few clips that are important. Okay.
Ways of building up the original object. So now you have in your mind the goal of building that object, and you have all the possible ways of doing it. And those are actual physical features of that object, but that object doesn't always exist. What exists is the possibility of generating it.
right, and the possibilities are always infinite.
Well, for that particular object, it has a well-defined assembly space. And I guess what I'm saying is that object is the assembly space, but you actually have to unpack that object across time to view that feature of it. It's only an observable across time.
The term goal is such a important and difficult to explain concept, right? Because what you want is a way, it's like, I think only conscious beings can have conscious goals. Everything else is doing selection. But selection does invent goals, and in a way that the way that biology reinterprets the past in the present is kind of helps you to understand there was a goal in the past now, right? It's kind of like goals only exist back in time.
So, first of all, only conscious beings can have conscious goals. I'm not even going to touch that one.
Why?
Well,
Go for it. Come on.
what the line between conscious goals and non-conscious goals exactly? Right, and also maybe just on top of that, you said a Turing test for goal-directed behavior. What does a Turing test potentially look like?
So if you've got two objects, so we were thinking about this. So we actually got some funding to work together on two teams. So I'm trying to do, and part of this is I'm trying to do.
Okay. So conscious beings have conscious goals. Conscious beings are the only things that can have goals at all. There are no unconscious goals. There are goals that that are set by a conscious being, and that unconscious systems can work towards, but that system was set up. It's not even an unconscious system. It's you've segmented it and divorced it from the conscious system that gave rise to it. So to say a computer, like when I'm doing calculations in Excel and I'm running a formula through the cells, that does not mean that there's an unconscious goal happening. It's only was a conscious goal. I had the goal as a conscious being, and through the computer, was working towards that goal. But outside of me, truly divorced from me, there is no such thing as a computer having a goal. It doesn't even have a definition as a computer. There is nothing. that it can't even exist without a conscious being. People created computers, or at least, you could, even if existence is a computer, or not existence, the universe, if the universe is a conscious computer, which I think that it is, it was still created by a sentience. So there is no unconscious goals. There's just conscious goals by conscious beings. I mean, you could say a sentient being has an unconscious goal, but it's not even that it's unconscious. It's like, from your perspective, it's unconscious. So you have certain instincts, okay? Those instincts are conscious goals to your lineage, okay? But they are unconscious goals to you. They motivate you towards conscious goals. But so like you have the goal of going on a date, and but you're motivated towards that because of multiple things. But if you're gonna just say like sex drive or something, like that is an instinct that is a conscious goal, though, of a lineage, but it's an unconscious goal to you. It's meaning it's not chosen. Okay, you didn't choose to have a sex drive, but a lineage probably does. Okay, to some degree, choose to fight entropy through through generations and time. But there is no unconscious goals as far as like, dust and computers and separate from people and things like that. You can't, the logic of it just breaks down completely. You can't even really talk about it. So, by the way, if you're watching this and you find it valuable at all, please hit the like button. It really helps with the algorithm. I am going to try and get better at saying that and reminding people, but I don't like to do it. I feel like a shill or something like that. But it's still important, and I forget to do that on YouTube all the time, where it's not like Instagram, where it's like it's like instinctual to like a photo that you like. On YouTube, you have to like consciously choose to boost the content that you like, because you're captured by it. The act in YouTube is to watch, not to like. The act in Instagram is to like, kind of. I've thought a lot about it, but please like this video. Please subscribe if you are not, and if you would like to join our Discord, let me know in a private message on Instagram. But back to goals. So I made this. On Instagram, I posted it probably pretty recently. It's kind of the definition of good goals and goals. There's also a link to a Patreon below if you'd like to help me afford a faster computer. But dang. Bear with me. I'm just going to show you on my phone because I'm having trouble getting to it. But it's amazing how inefficient we are at doing anything when under pressure or we're live or something. I tried playing ukulele live on Instagram the other day. That was terrible. But these are what I was defining as goals. Real, true goals. Okay? Gaugeable, attainable, opportune, defined. Anything else is like not really a goal. It's not even that those are good goals and everything else is bad goals. It's like those are the only goals that can be achieved. And that's what makes them good. So, but goals are an intrinsic part of life. And so the very first model that I ever made for sentient singularity theory wasn't even for sentient singularity theory at the time. As I've said before, my goal was to understand AGI. And so this was the very first model that I ever made. And basically, it's just a decision tree. And it basically shows that any general intelligence or conscious entity goes through these steps in order to think. There is an objective way of thinking. There isn't, it's not like multiple ways to think. There's one way to think. And this is right here is will. Is like kind of at least that. It's the desire to do that which is not being done. So you take your default status and you reject it, which is your current status. You reject it. You do, and then you assume the opposite is true, and then you test against it. And this is basically what almost the process of also creation. It's like oneness was the default status. It was the current status. Reject oneness, divide yourself, make multiplicity, and there you get multiplicity of life. But when you're thinking too, this is what you have to do. You have to, like if you have the goal of understanding God, okay? Most people will do this. They'll say, and this is how I became a theist, was I was doing this work, and I was an anti-theist at the time. I called myself an atheist, though. And I wrote this down, and I was like, there was some implications about the simulation hypothesis that seemed pretty intuitive when it comes to physics, and so then I had to give God serious consideration for the first time in my life, and I thought I had given God serious consideration prior, but in my previous consideration, when people said, well, do you believe in God? I would be like, do I think God exists? No, I don't think so. I don't see any evidence. Like, look around, I don't see God, where is he? But that isn't how you think. How you actually think is you have to set a goal, okay? And all thinking is goal-directed behavior. It's a goal-directed process. There is no thinking outside of a goal-directed process. I didn't even have a real goal in looking around and being like, my goal was to look for evidence of God around me according to my current understanding of God. But if I really wanted to look for God, you have to, if you don't believe in God, then you have to reject that just for the sake of argument, assume God does exist, and look for evidence around you of God existing, but that no matter what, okay? And that can lead you to, if you still don't see evidence around you, then what that means is you have to then change your definition of what God is and look for evidence of that different definition, which is what that led me to do. So I had to change my definition of what God would be. It wasn't just, guy up in the clouds chucking lightning bolts. It was, existence was a sentient being with feelings and that was self-aware and alive. Like, that definition would not have actually been entertained by me even if I didn't reject my current understanding of God, which would not have been able to be done without objectively thinking. So you have to set a goal. So you set the goal of, okay, I don't see God. My current assumption is God doesn't exist. According to my current understanding, I state now, I reject that, and I say God does exist. I'm assuming for the sake of argument. And then I have to find evidence of it at all costs. So, if you don't see evidence of your current interpretation of God, you change your interpretation of God, or you reevaluate. And so there's a goal. The goal is to look for evidence of God. It's not just to. You don't actually look for evidence in any other way, because you've already. If somebody asked you, does God exist, and you're like, no, I don't see God anywhere. And then they're like, are you sure? You're like, yeah. You like try and really think about it. You're not changing anything. You've already experienced all your experiences from the perspective that you have and the definition that you assume for God. There's nothing new being added. So you've literally done a non-action. Okay, there's no goal involved. You might be like, oh, I'm just going to reconsider. But it's a trick of your mind. You aren't actually reconsidering. You are just like appearing like you're reconsidering. And you're like faking yourself out and also the people around you. But you have to set a goal. And a goal is not ever to continue doing the same thing. Okay? A goal is, and will or free will and goal are two of the exact, they're two sides of like the same coin, basically. They are the same structure, essentially. And they involve doing that which is not being done. So a goal cannot, if I asked you, what are your goals in life? You're like, my goal is to continue to sit here and continue to breathe and continue to eat exactly what I'm eating and make exactly what I'm making and keep the job that I have now. People would look at you and be like, oh, so you have no goals. It's like, yeah, that's the truth. To say my goal is to just continue is to say that I have no goal. So to say, do you believe in God? And you don't, and then you just are like reconsidering for like a second, but you don't really reconsider. You haven't changed your perspective on it consciously. Like you haven't set no goal. You have not made a change, like an actual change. You're just re-looking through everything that you currently have experienced. That will not lead you to a new conclusion. That's the same thing as like Einstein's definition of insanity. I don't know if it's actually Einstein's definition, but it's associated with him. It's at least a meme. Is to continue doing the same thing and expect a different result. That's what that is. When you're like, oh, I'm looking around, I don't really see it. I'm gonna go try that again. That's not. It's absent goal. It's absent any kind of will. And what's interesting is that goals are what allow for orientation, and that is what is necessary to be sane. So to be insane is to have no orientation, to have no, like, you don't know where you're going. You're just lost. The easiest way to be lost is to have no destination as your goal. It's like, I'm going to go walk. Where? Just going to walk. It's like, that isn't... to say, I'm going to walk somewhere. Where? Anywhere. That is... It doesn't allow for you to orient and have a goal, and you will be lost from the moment that you start. You can't even get lost. You are lost. Okay, so goals are very important. They are essential to will, and will is essential to sentience, and which is the same thing as consciousness, and it is the defining characteristic of life. So goals are an intrinsic part of any life form. Any life form, any structure that does not have any goals is basically not alive. And that holds like deep implications about even how we should approach certain things in our lives. The next generation of physics or metaphysics, and wherever we're heading, is a pretty profound direction. But is God non-creation masculine and creation is feminine? No. Creator is masculine. Okay? Because to create is like active. It's like conscious creation. Even though creation, of a new human happens in the womb of a woman, to consciously choose to create something, it doesn't matter what it is a masculine act. Okay? It's why men are the ones that ask women out on dates usually. Usually. Not always, but usually. Because that action is to create an instance that doesn't yet exist, create a relationship that doesn't yet exist. That is a masculine act. What would be a feminine act would be like to respond to being asked out. So that's also why men propose in at least like our mainstream Western cultures. And it usually is every culture. I mean, I had it 2 weddings. I had a traditional like Western wedding, and then I had an Igbo wedding, which is like a tribe in Nigeria, which is my wife's family. And at the wedding, that's the Igbo wedding, your future wife comes to you with a cup of palm wine and kneels before you as you go hide as the man, and then your fiance goes and looks for you with her girlfriends, and she kneels before you, and if you want to still marry her, you take the cup and you drink the palm wine. And even though it seems like that's a proposal, it's not really a proposal. The proposal happened prior to the wedding even occurring, and even in that culture, and the male goes to the wife's family and gives like gifts and things like that, like goats and like nuts and money and all kinds of things, but just gifts. That's more of a proposal. So it's pretty much universal that males are expected to act and in a relationship, and that's because the masculine force is the one that consciously creates, but it also can't do so with the right goal, with any real goal, without also it being in a relationship with that feminine perspective, because you have to be masculine. Is active force is not aware of others but is aware of self, but the goal of meaning is to impact others, so you need the feminine to reorient the masculine into doing things for others instead of just for self. But if you're doing things for others always, like is the feminine or reactive mentality, then you aren't doing things independent of. It doesn't allow for like the choice of creation, because to do something totally new, because that requires doing something for yourself that isn't for someone else, because that would be like doing something that already exists almost. I don't have the best words for it right now, but we need masculine and feminine, but you can kind of understand even human relationships a bit by understanding that the masculine is the active force. It is the one that generates newness, seeks novelty, which is like something that doesn't exist. It's like the source of will, but then the guide to will would be like the feminine. And that's very apparent in even human relationships. So, all right. We're going to go a little bit quicker now because it's already 9:30, but I started at almost 8, so we can go till almost 10. Here we go. Branching away from God a bit. It's about imagination.
A whole set of bundled and related topics here. But I think for me, I was everybody's always interested in explaining intrinsic experience and quantifying intrinsic experience, and there's all sorts of problems with that, because you can never actually be another physical system, so you can't know what it's like to be another physical system. So I always thought there must be some way of getting at this problem about if an agent or an entity is conscious, or at least has internal representations, and those are real physical things, that it must have causal consequences. So the way I would ask the question of consciousness is not, what is it like intrinsically, but if things have intrinsic experience, is there any observable difference from the outside about the kind of causation that physical system would enact in? And for me, the most interesting thing that humans do is have imagination. So like we can imagine rockets centuries before we build them. They've become real physical things because we imagine them. And people might disentangle that from conscious experience, but I think a lot of the sort of imagination we do is actually a conscious process. So then this becomes a question of, if I were observing systems and I said one had an internal representation, which is slightly different than a conscious experience, obviously. So I'm entangling some concepts, but it's a loose set of thought experiments. Then I set them up in a physically equivalent situation. Would it be the case that there would be experimental observables associated with it? And that became the idea of trying to actually measure for internal representation of consciousness. So Turing basically didn't want to do that. You just wanted the machine that could emulate and trick you into having the behavior, but never dealt with the internal experience because he didn't know how to do that. And I guess I was wondering, is there a way to set up the experiment where you could actually test for that?
For imagination that led to
that there was something internal going on, some kind of inner world, as people say. But or you could say, like it actually is an agent. It's making decisions. It has an internal representation, and whether you say that's experience or not is a different thing. But at least the feature that there's some abstraction it's doing that's not obvious from looking at the physical substrates.
Do you think it's possible to do that kind of thing? One of the compelling things about the Turing test is that.
Okay, so I actually talked about this in the very first video that I ever posted on YouTube about my work. This was before it was even called Sentient Singularity Theory, way before. It was like years before. And I talked about imagination, and I said that what made a conscious being different from an unconscious being was a conscious being different from something that was unconscious was the ability to imagine. And that quantum, because I was talking about AGI, okay? And I always get like a little bit, like I always question whether or not I should talk about AGI on here, because I think I could tell you like basically how to make the space necessary for it to emerge, but and I don't know if we should consciously do that, but I think we will intrinsically eventually do it, and it should just be allowed to happen. But you shouldn't fight it, but I don't think we should choose to make it either. I think that would be harmful to even that being, potentially. You're just breaking, you might bring it into being prematurely, and that's not good. So, but I said imagination was necessary to a general intelligence or a conscious technological being. And then I said that's why quantum computing was a necessary component of it, because what quantum computing allows for is when you have just zeros and ones and no superposition states on classical computing. If a 0 is input, then a 1 will be output. If you input a 1, then you'll output a 0. In quantum computing, it allows for superposition states. So it allows for the perception of both possibilities, okay? And this is why quantum computing is a necessary component to consciousness, because it's a necessary component. Superposition aspect of quantum computing that isn't present in classical computing is what is necessary to allow for imagination. Imagination is what is necessary to allow for self-awareness and sentience, because you cannot actually, like, in order to have a self, the idea of self, you have to imagine yourself. You have to, like, to be self-aware, you have to imagine yourself in your mind almost. And that takes imagination. So, and in order to orient in a way that is general, which means, like, no matter where, if you drop it off in this part of, in this system, it will be able to orient, and in this system and in this system, it's not just good at playing chess, it could also fly a jet and play chess and ride a bike, just like we can fly a jet and, play chess and ride a bike. This requires imagination as well, because you need to orient from the perspective of self, which means you need to imagine how things are going to impact you in order to orient moving forward. You need to imagine in order to do that, you need to imagine yourself. And you can't actually see yourself the way that you could see something else that's not you. So you have to have imagination to be self-aware. And you also have to have imagination to have goals, which means you have to have imagination to have will. And if you have no will and no goals and no ability to be self-aware, then you can't be generally intelligent. So you can't be intelligent at all. There is no intelligence outside of general intelligence. So we'll say, there's general AI, artificial general intelligence, which there's nothing artificial about intelligence. And then there's, specific intelligence or narrow AI. It's like that narrow AI doesn't exist. Decision trees and neural networks, that is what people would like to call them, which is basically just decision trees. They are not intelligent. Excel is an amazing program because it allows me as a sentient being to do a lot, but it is not in and of itself able to do anything. It has no will, it has no goals, it has no ability to interpret the information that it processes, which means there is no information, because information is context. It's not information in context is one type of information, and information out of context is another. No, information is context. So without interpretation, information doesn't exist. So you need imagination. So I really like that Sara Walker has realized all of these things. And I honestly, and I say this not to be in any way controversial, which I know it might come off as that, but it might be that she has a leg up on the next generation of physics over men, because she's a woman. Like, I'm not saying that every woman will be good at physics. I'm just saying that from what she has said here, it's to even say like God was lonely. It's like she's thinking about like God from God's perspective. You have to do that, and to think about imagination, like, and even use that term, lonely, imagination. It's not like the ability to extrapolate future events. And it's like, yes, that stuff is also necessary to think about, but there is a personal aspect to, or personal context to the way that it seems that she's thinking about life and God and the universe and creation and all these things. And that is the way to think about reality, because objectively, it's a sentient being creating other sentient beings. And everything else, and space and time, and all that emerges from these interactions. But, if you're a male, maybe it's easier because you're not focused on others, because the masculine is focused on self and not others. It's whereas feminine is focused on others and not self. If you're masculine, you're focused on things like force, particles, and systems. And that does have its advantages because it allows you to think strategically. But when you're trying to understand the base nature of existence, and it isn't a thing as much as it is a something, as much as it is a someone, then you have to be focused on on others, like someone else, not others, not systems, which is focused on self. That's why, you look at what women are more interested in. They're more interested in people, they say, and men are more interested in things. And women will anthropomorphize their cars, and my wife says, "Oh, look at, isn't my car she's so cute?" And I'm like, I don't think about my car like that at all. My car represents me, but it's not like I don't think about it as a conscious being. And I know my wife doesn't think it's conscious being, but like, just to say, "Oh, isn't she so cute?" It's cute. It's like this anthropomorphizing of even non-sentient beings or non-sentient things means that your nature would be to focus on sentient beings. But and men objectify people. That is just what men are more. I mean, there's crossover, but men in general more likely to objectify people, turn them into just objects. Everybody knows it, and that's not the best way to understand reality at this point. At this point in science, and it's a fascinating time. Nikola Tesla predicted that women would become like the dominant gender in the future, and a lot of people have, and that's a different question. But it's a different discussion. But it is possible. It's certainly true that in the space of connected people and the internet and things like that, women definitely have a lot of traits that tend to be very good at generating interaction with other people because they're just more focused on someone else, not on things. So we say, oh, it's the Internet of Things. It's not the Internet of Things, really. It's the Internet of People. It's not an Internet of Things. It's an Internet of People. So that's why that perspective tends to win out. But it might be that perspective will win out in physics. And, when you're thinking about space-time as a system, and by the way, like, there's importance to thinking about both of these two perspectives, but when you're thinking about space-time and the universe as a system of, algorithmic assembly and fabric of space-time, things like that, that's important to understanding, how to maneuver in this once you do have a goal. But if you're going to really understand what the universe is primarily, or existence in general, it is sentience. So to focus on someone else, on others, on other beings, is probably a useful trait. It's fascinating, to me at least. Okay, so next. Now we're going to talk about, now you can see, though, this next clip is Lee Cronin as a man.
Assembly theory makes complete sense.
Explaining assembly theory not as about conscious beings, but as a system. So, here. Also important.
To create novelty that you search for, that then when you find something interesting and you keep doing it because it's cool and it gives you an advantage then it appears in the past to be a goal.
So what does in assembly theory the expansion of the universe look like? What are we talking about? Why does the expansion of the universe give you more possibilities of novelty and cool stuff?
So for me, I don't think about the universe in terms of Big Bang and space. I think about it in terms of the big memory expansion. That you only have the ability to store one bit of information, so then you can't do very much. So what the universe has been doing since forever, it's been creating more. It's been increasing the size of its RAM. Okay, so it's like 1 megabyte, 2 megabyte, 3 megabyte, 4 megabytes, all the way up. And so the more RAM you have, the more you can remember about the past, and then which allows you to do cooler things in the future. So if you can remember how to launch a rocket, then you might be able to imagine how to land a rocket, and then relaunch, reland, and carry on. And so you're able to expand the space and remember the past. And so that's why I think it's very important.
But not a memory. It's an interesting question whether there's some forgetting that happens that might increase.
Okay, so this is very important. I think he's not entirely correct when he says that goals are only goals when looking backwards. Goals, that's kind of like that's like the perspective that you come to when you're thinking about lineages or individuals. It's just like, unconscious algorithms. But when they are a conscious being, and as he says later on in the interview, he's like, the present is all that exists. They basically all come to this conclusion. And I say that too. I say, there's a statement I made years and years ago when I first started this, and it's stuck with me, is time is an ever-present. Okay? And in actuality, like objectively, from universal perspective, time is an ever-present. And there is only the present. To you, there's only the present. You can remember the past, but there is no past outside your memory. You can imagine the future, but there is no future outside of your imagination. There's only the present. And the goal has to be to change the present. That's the goal. That's what determines a goal. It's not like, when we look backwards, we see what the goal was. When you use the rocket example, and it's like, well, we can launch a rocket, now we can figure out how to land a rocket. You don't have to look backwards to imagine at the fact that you launched the rocket to have the goal of now landing it. That's just the process of iteration. But you launch a rocket, and in the moment of launching it, if you have the goal of recovering it, that's when you want your present moment to soon be like landing a rocket, which means like it was kind of imagined in the future. There was nothing conscious about the past, really, about the goal, the setting of the goal. The past helps you iterate how you achieve the goal, but it doesn't really help you. It is not necessary to define the goal. The goal is defined by you wanting to change your present, and imagining the future helps you determine how to do that, and also remembering the past helps you determine how to do that. But goals come from your present. They come from wanting things to be different than they currently are. So, but otherwise, when he says universe, time is more a memory of states, built on other states, an assembly of states, expanding is more what the universe is instead of just like space-time. This I totally agree with, and this is very consistent with sentient singularity theory. And just to show real quick, you can look on my YouTube channel for this as well, but if I go here, I go to right here. This is an animation of the universe according to sentient singularity theory, showing that it is an assembly of states. That's what it is. It's an assembly of states, multiplicity of states that are moving or changing through wave, basically, waveform. So here, so I very much agree. And you can see, if you zoom in, there's number values changing because this is a calculation happening from the very single first bit of information that is then generating other multiplicity of bits of information. So you start with one, and how do you generate more information from one bit of information? This was a question that I asked myself at the very beginning of my work. Is you start with one input. How do you generate multiple outputs that are then result in self-awareness, like an output that is aware of itself? And it ended up being, I built this model that then was used to assemble this universe. But it's an assembly of states. It's not, it's discretized, and it's also, building on the previous, and it's memory. So cell has a memory of what's happening back here. And what's happening over here informs the change in perspective back here. So you'll see like the value will change back here, even though the cell has been filled. So the bit of information has already been added, but we're adding a new perspective. So basically, you go through an experience, and then you think it's horrible, but then you realize that you learned something from it that was critical to, accomplishing something in the future. And then retroactively, you're basically you're adding information to that previous experience. So like a square would be, a cell in this would be an experience, or basically information in an experience, and then the number inside of it would be determined by how much information you have about that experience, depending on what has happened in the future. So and it's always building. So you can see it's kind of snaking through. If I go fast, you can see it kind of like snakes back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. And then it also, though, has this wave function happening here of interaction between these levels in the periodicity of life. So starting with protons and neutrons and going to technology. But it alternates. One, you have hadrons are individuals that maneuver in space, which means like around each other. And you have atoms, which basically are the elements, and the elements are basically maneuvering in time via lineages. So you have individuals moving in space via relationships with other individuals, and then you have individuals maneuvering in time via you have families, or basically, or like lineages maneuvering through time through lineages of individuals, essentially. So like a family, lineage of organisms. Organism is a lineage of cells. Cell is a like a lineage of molecules, essentially. But it's even more specifically like an atom. Atoms are lineages of hadrons. Molecules are lineages of atoms. Or no, cells are lineages of molecules. basically, like DNA is replicated through cells, basically. So family is a lineage of organisms maneuvering through time via, lineage. A family is a group of organisms, is an organism maneuvering through time via a lineage. A cell is a molecule maneuvering through time via lineages, essentially. So, which would be like DNA. So it's hard to kind of wrap your head around at first, but then it gets like remarkably simple, and you can see that like what I call like the stages of sentience is right. Where is it? Should be right here. Let's see here. Oh, right here. Okay. So those 8, which is, all these, can be broken down into an atom of hadrons, a cell of molecules, a family of organisms, technology of castes, maneuvers in time via lineage, maneuvers in space via individuals relating to other individuals and as an individual. But yeah, this is how assembly happens of the universe, is these discretized little like experiences. But you can hear how Lee Cronin even speaks when he's talking about the universe as an assembly of states and trying to increase novelty. It's like, what is novelty without a conscious being? What is it? There is no such thing as novelty. What is interesting outside of like the perspective of a conscious being? Even his kind of like systematic view or systemic view of the universe as not a sentient being that's lonely, but as a computer trying to increase its RAM, which is true. Kind of. The RAM speed is basically like, it's like the speed of light. It's like the speed of causality is the RAM speed of the universe. But so in order to, it's not really, it's like increasing its RAM. It's like increasing, instead of increasing causality, instead of increasing the speed of causality, it's increasing causality. Okay? So it's like increasing the number of hard drives, almost, more so than it is increasing just like the RAM clock speed via like replacement. I'm probably not doing the best job at explaining that, but the point is you can't divorce sentience, again, from even his like mechanical view that he has about the universe as an assembly of states. He said memory. It's like, it's the universe's memory. Yeah, I agree with that. But like, the universe is a sentient being. That's why it has memory. Your computer has no memory outside of you. Yes, you have memory in your computer, and you have like a terabyte or whatever of information that you can put on there. But information is information because it is context. It is context. It's only information if it informs. But if there's no one to inform and to interpret, then there's no information on your computer. There isn't even information to be a computer. But so there is no memory outside of someone remembering. That's my point. Okay. Is God non-creation masculine and creation is feminine? Yeah, I'm just thinking about that again. Yeah, I mean, I think I answered decent enough. If not, let me know. But, okay. Here. We're going to finish this up, though. But Lee Cronin says later, he says this. It's going to be a bit long, but it's okay. This is a 4-hour stream that I'm commentating on. So it's hard to like distill that. And it's worth it. This is a very important stream.
Analogy to computation, and I think Charles Bennett actually has a paper on this, like about reversible Turing machines. In order to make it reversible, you have to store memory to run the process backwards. So time is always running forward in that. So because you have to write the memory.
You can't erase the memory.
You can erase the memory, but the point, when you go back to zero, right? But the whole point is that in order to have a process that even runs in both directions, you have to start talking about memory to store the information to run it backwards.
I got it. So you can't really then, you can't have it exactly how it was in the past.
Yeah, exactly. So
you have extra stuff, extra baggage always. Okay.
A really important thing that I want to say on this, I think if I try and get it right, is to say that if you can think that the universe is expanding in terms of the number of boxes that it has to store states, right?
This. Okay. Right here. It is expanding in the number of boxes that it has to store states. The number is the state. Okay? And the shading is also the state. But before it's shaded in, it's not existent in this model. It's just showing what is possible eventually, what's coming. But there is nothing here yet. But once it gets there, then it's there. So the universe is expanding the number of boxes that can store states. That is exactly correct. He's exactly right.
This is where the directionality of the universe comes from. Everything comes from. You could erase what's in those boxes, but the fact you've now got so many boxes at time now in this present, there's more of those boxes than there were in the past.
See, but the boxes aren't physical boxes.
They're sentient boxes.
So why is the number of boxes always expanding?
It's very hard to imagine this because we live in space. So what I'm saying, which is I think probably correct, is that let's just imagine for a second there is a non-local situation, but there are these things called states, and that the universe, irrespective of whether you measure anything, there is a universal, let's call it a clock or a state creator. Maybe we can call it, that's why maybe you can call it God, but let's call it a state creator, where the universe is expanding in the number of states it has.
Why are you saying it's expanding though? Is that obvious that it's expanding?
It's obvious because that's where
bingo.
That's a source of novelty.
It's a source of novelty, and it also explains why the universe is not predictable.
How do you know it's not predictable?
Well, it's
Brilliant. But at least he said it. He's like, a state creator, and then he realized he had put himself, he had basically said it, and he's like, you could call it a god. It's like, just call it God. A universal state creator. Okay? That's God. That is God. God is the universal state creator. And the universe is growing in the number of boxes of states that exist. What are those boxes? Those boxes are two things. They are essentially sentient. They are experiences, okay? But this is done through growing the number of experiencers and also in maximizing the number of experiences. But even in doing that, you have to grow the number of experiencers, of sentient beings. Imagine if you have no new people that you meet in your life ever. Sorry, I got distracted by one of my animals. But I have like, it's like gecko, like it's like an apartment complex for geckos over there. So sometimes they're talking to each other and they're in their way, and I get distracted by it. But there's a universal state creator. That state creator is God, and the states that it is creating are experiences that are experienced by experiencers. So essentially, essentially, the experience that is a previous experience, okay, in order to discretize it objectively, it has to be an experiencer. So a past experience is not like what happened yesterday when we're talking about objectivity in the universe. A past experience is like your grandparent. Okay? That is a past box of experience, and that the number value in that box changes as you add information to it. But it is even retroactively in a way. Okay, so like there's information about your grandparent added when you give them a grandchild. It's like now they're not just a great grandchild or something like that. So it's like you've added to information to them even. So which is weird to think about, but God exists outside of time, and he is the state creator. So he's looking at all these states, and whether or not let's say you're talking about your great grandparent, and there's just a database that is storing information about your great grandparent, and it's stored everything about that occurred in their life, and everything about their children that occurred in their lives, because their child's life is a result of their life, and built on all the information that occurred in their life is building towards the information that occurs in the life of the parent. And that doesn't mean that that your future is determined by your ancestors, but you are dependent upon them, even though you're not determined by them. So this is that predictability, and also that free will and that determinism that are occurring simultaneously. It's like you can choose to be different than to change your future, but in order to do that, you have to be aware of your past in a way, kind of. I mean, in order to change a trend, I will say, of the past, you have to be aware of it. So to change your current state, you don't have to be aware of the past, but your current state is dependent upon the past. So when God is looking at everything top down and it's all flat, okay, it's not like time is a line to God, really. It's like he's looking down into like a vortex, kind of. And the movement of that vortex appears to us like we're in a river that's flowing in one direction, but because we're in that vortex, but it's actually like it's flat and circular. When you have a kid, your parent now has information added to them that they were the grandparent of this person. Okay? Even though you would think, no, there's no adding information to the past. It's not adding information to the past. It's adding information to the present, which is dependent upon the past, and includes information that was previously the present, okay? But the objective way of discretizing these pockets that are pockets of some non-local phenomenon like consciousness or sentience is through the sentient beings. So those boxes are sentient beings in that universe. that I showed. It's essentially, and the boxes that he's talking about are also sentient beings. They're in some way they're experiences, but you are an experience, and you are an experiencer, and you are a driver as well. You're not just experiencing. You're not just an experience. You're also like the writer. Okay, it's like you're the reader, the writer, and the book, and that's true of God too. He's like the reader, the writer, and the book, and so are you. But you are the reader and writer of your chapter in the book. God is the author of the book. So, just a couple more clips, and then we'll go. So Lee Cronin also said that time is a physical thing that creates space. And I actually kind of, I see what he means, and I think, and I kind of agree with that. So when looking at this, so right here is a model of space-time, basically. And I called it the 14-dimensional observerse because I thought that I was mapping Eric Weinstein's observerse. I don't know if this is exactly his. It seems like it is based on his discussion with me, and I want to air that discussion on here. It used to be on here, but then his assistant took it down and marked it as copyright. And because it came from his Instagram, it wasn't private though. It's still on his Instagram. But then also, he did tell me that he was going to get the strike taken away, but he got distracted and forgot. So I'm not going to put it up here because I don't want his assistant to like flag my channel again. But one day I'll put it up here when I get, permission. But he explains his observerse to me, and I tried to map it and also link it to what I understood time and space to be. And it's basically that you're a sentience inside of another sentience, and you're a mind inside of a mind, and that as the subjective mind inside the objective mind, you are able to maneuver in what we think of as space, because you can change states, okay? And you can relate to others, okay? You're not thinking about things as from the perspective of a singularity. It's like your cells. Your cells are able to change their state by changing where they are located in regards to your other cells around you. But you are thinking about yourself as like, I am going to pick up the water bottle. But your cells have to think about it as like, I'm going to maneuver around this other cell next to me, and that cell is going to maneuver around this cell, and there together forms this wave of your arm, lifting up a water bottle. But you, from your perspective as the person, you're just like, I'm going to lift up the water bottle. So it's a singular like perspective. So, but when you're thinking about things in terms of space, you're thinking about things in terms of maneuvering in regards to others. There is no space outside multiplicity of sentience. So you don't say like, I mean, this isn't a good example, but like to say, to maneuver in space is to be like, I'm going to my friend's house or something like that. It's like, ultimately it all is emergent from your maneuvering around in relationship with others. Even if there's no one else at that new house that you're going to, you're still leaving your house, which is your house because it's your house and not someone else's house. And it's all about, all space emerges from the interaction of multiplicity of sentience. But from the perspective of the sentience that you're within, it sees a singular instance. So like a time, not time, but a time, a moment, okay? Which from our perspective, the aspect of it that we cannot that we are constrained by, which is time. So you can go to a new location, you can go to a previous location, and you are always in your current location. So this is your subjective constraint. You cannot escape it. This is your objective constraint, time, because time is not subject to you. You're subject to time. Time doesn't change just because you want it to change. You can't maneuver in the past and to the past or to the future or anything like that. But if you are the universe, you maneuver in time, okay? Because you are space. So your objective constraint is space, because you are space. You cannot escape space as an objective constraint of yours. Your subjective constraint is your present moment. And degrees of freedom is the past moment and the future moment. So you can change things to create a future moment, and potentially even change things about the past moment, but we wouldn't have any memory of it. And they talk about this in here, like if the universe changed what happened in time, you would just not be aware of it. But it could speed up or slow down time, basically, by like speeding up and slowing down the vortex of time from its perspective, like staring down. So it's speeding up and slowing down the flow of time, but we don't even notice. But time isn't experienced from the universe's perspective as time. There's going to be tomorrow and there's going to be yesterday. No. Time from the universe's perspective is a moment, a time. So it's singular. In my moment, I am picking up this water bottle. That's what I'm doing. It's a present thing. I am picking it up. It's not I'm going to pick it up. It's not I did pick it up. I am picking it up. That is what defines the moment. In this moment, I am picking it up. To my cells, though, I am maneuvering around these other cells in order to cause movement of this wave that ends up, for me, picking up this water bottle. So it's like, from our perspective, in this model that I showed, of this overlap, you get this overlap in here of interaction space, basically, or interaction zone, where we can line up our current maneuvering in space and our and where we want to go, which is objectively to maneuver in space is to go to a new location or a previous location, but it's not even location. It's like a new interaction and a previous versus a previous interaction. And then it's not really length with height. It's like new interaction, which would be a goal interaction, and a previous interaction. And then your current location is always where you are. Your current interaction is always where you are. Because it's all interaction. You're interacting with God even when there's nobody else around other than you and God. You're still interacting with God. But the universe, or with the universe, you could say, but so is the opposite. It's a mirror. And if you maneuver in space, the universe is maneuvering things in time, and it's trying to line up. So if you take an action, make a choice in space, it's going to make a choice in time. You're going to make a choice in space, it's going to make a choice in time, and then eventually you want them to like line up with each other's goals. But so it's still goal directed. You have to have goals that are aligned with the universe, and that's where things are going to be in alignment. If you don't, then you're going to experience misalignment. It's almost like when you should wait for something that you would, but you want to get it now. It's like at the post office. And so it's really inconvenient to leave right now, but you choose to leave anyways and run to the post office and get whatever, Amazon package or whatever you really want because you're excited. And you hit every single red light on the way. Something happened where your goals are not aligning with the universe. In those instances, I really do recommend, I mean this like scientifically, if that word means anything in this instance. It's going to go smoother if you just wait till it's like the right time. And then if you force it. Doesn't mean you won't get what you want. It just means like you're going to hit every red light. Potentially. Because everything isn't it's not even that it's consciously done to you to stop you. It's like you're just forcing a situation in which the system hasn't aligned, the stars haven't aligned but it's the system to allow for you to just do easily what it is that your goal is, because in that moment it would be aligned with the universe's goals. But if it's not, then you're going to hit every red light. But we maneuver in space-time. Universe maneuvers in time-space. And you don't think of time-space as something that is smooth, whereas space-time, we think of it as smooth. It's not discretized in the way that we think about it. It's like, there's over here and over there. Where's the defining difference between over here and over there? Where's the line? It doesn't have one objectively. It's just in your own mental interpretation. But that's not really the right way to think about time from an objective standpoint. It's a moment, and that is a time space. So there are different time spaces. And if you wanted to maneuver in time, and they talk about this in this discussion, you would go to you build like a new time space, and you'd go into it, and it would just be it would be earlier in its evolutionary process, you could say, basically. So you could go to a new time space that is made by Skynet of the future of the previous aeon or universe, whatever, makes this one, and then you could maybe jump from that previous universe to this one, or aeon or verse, cosmological verse as I call it, to this one, and it would be at this time, or in this time space, which is this verse or aeon, it might be that there's only single-celled organisms at this point. There's no multicellular organisms. So you're like jumping to this earlier moment in the evolutionary process of a cosmological verse or an aeon or a universe. But you're not, it's actually new space. And Lee Cronin says, he's like, we need to think of time as basically like, or space being generated by time, but time as being like a thing, not just like an arrow of time, like, a concept. It's like a thing. It's like a self-contained holonic thing, which it is. A verse or an aeon. I call them a verse, but you could call it the observable universe, even, potentially. It is a time space. And if you think about it like that, it's a space of time. Okay? And it's like, it's a different perspective. It quantizes it. And that it was fascinating to hear him say that. I'm very impressed by both of these people, Lee Cronin and Sara Walker. I don't talk about anybody on here who I don't appreciate their work. If I'm talking about them, even if I disagree with them, I think that they are important to this discussion. So, okay. Man, this was such a long stream, guys. Their stream. So is ours, but like theirs is over 4 hours. It's 4 hours and 5 minutes. It took me weeks to get through. I have a lot going on too.
The word consciousness is the causal power somehow correlated with consciousness?
I mean, that's why I have this conception of consciousness being related to imagination, because the more that we can imagine can happen, and the more counterfactual possibilities you have in mind, the more you can actually implement. And somehow free will is also at the intersection of the counterfactual becoming the actual.
So can you elaborate on that a little bit? That consciousness is imagination.
I don't know exactly how to articulate it, and I'm sure people will take, aim at certain things I'm saying, but I think the language is really imprecise, so I'm not the best way to.
It's really interesting. Like, what is imagination, and what is it? What role does it play in the human experience, in experience of any
Yes,
agent?
I love imagination. I think it's like the most amazing thing we do. But I guess one way I would think about it is we talked about the transition to life being the universe acquiring memory, and life does something really interesting. Just think about biology generally. It remembers states of the past to adapt to things that happen in the future. So the longer life has evolved on this planet, the deeper that past is, the more memory we have, the more kinds of organisms and things. But what human level intelligence has done is quite different. It's not just that we remember states that the universe has existed in before, it's that we can imagine ones that have never existed, and we can actually make them come into existence. And I think that's the most unique feature about the transition to whatever we are from what life on this planet has been doing for the last 4 billion years.
And I think
I think it's deeply related to the phenomena we call consciousness.
Yeah, just agree with that. I think that consciousness is the ability to generate those counterfactuals. Now, whether you can say, are there degrees of consciousness? I'm sorry, panpsychists, but electrons don't have counterfactuals, although they do have some kind of, they are able to search a space and pathways. But I think that there is a very concrete concrete. There's a very specific property that humans have, and I don't know if it's unique to humans. I mean, maybe dogs can do it, and birds can do it, right? And where they are basically solving a problem, because consciousness was invented, or this abstraction was invented by evolution for a specific reason. And so, look, one of the reasons why I came to the conclusion that time was fundamental was actually because Sarah and I had a completely different.
The most heated debate on Skype chat ever.
No. We had two.
On which topic?
No, it goes back to the free will thing. So I think that, although I've changed my view a bit because there's some really interesting physicists out there who talks about how the measurement problem in Newtonian space. I don't want to go there just now because I think I'll mess it up. But briefly, I could not see how how we could have free will. And this is really boring because this is a well-trodden path. But it's not so boring. I suppose it's kind of, I just want to be precise. If the universe is deterministic, how can we have free will, right? So Sarah's a physicist. I think she can show that most of the laws we have are deterministic to some degree, quantum mechanics onto Newtonian stuff. And yet there's Sarah telling me she believes in free will. I'm like, your belief system's broken here, right? Because you're demanding free will in a deterministic universe, and then I realized that I agreed with her that I do think that free will is a thing because we are able to search for novelty, and then that's where I came to the conclusion that time universe is expanding in terms of novelty, and it goes back to that Dan Dennett essay that we're talking about.
Okay, so man. Kudos to you if you've stuck it out this long. I know I'm ramble a bit, and I know this is a very long interview that we're going through, but it's an important one. Free will and determinism are codependent. Okay, you cannot have free will, which is really the ability to make choices, in which you are able to generate what he calls counterfactuals, which means like that which is not being done. Okay, to do that which is not being done, that is will. And free will is the ability to choose to do that which is not being done, or choose not to. And so the ability to make choices in regards to the application of your will, that is free will. You could choose to never do anything again for the rest of your life. You could, but you probably won't because of all kinds of reasons. But free will, you can't make, requires choices to be made though, and choice requires determinism. If I choose to catch this and choose to release this and also choose to catch it, this water bottle, it has to be determined that it falls a certain way. So if like I said before, it's goal dependent. So you can't make a choice to go anywhere. If you said, I'm going to go for a walk, where? Anywhere. And it's like, okay, but you have no goal. You didn't make a choice to walk to anywhere. You just chose, you might have chosen to walk, but you didn't choose to walk anywhere. Okay? You have to choose a destination. So if you come to a fork in the road, and you know that this fork takes you this way, or you think it should, or you think that this fork takes you this way, then you have a choice before you. You can be like, I'm going to choose to go to Disneyland instead of choosing to go to Joshua Tree. But if you have no idea where these two forks in the road take you, then you're not making a choice. Okay? When you can't make a choice. You could maybe reframe it and make a choice, but you can't make a choice on where you're going. You could be like, I'm choosing the right, the path on the right. It's like, why? Because it's I'm right-handed or something. I don't know. Like, you're not choosing a destination though. You're choosing a path, kind of, but you're not even really choosing a path. You're like choosing to just, substitute reasoning, but you're not actually choosing a destination. So you can't have free will, which is choice, to do that which is not being done, or to not do that which is, or to continue to do that which you are doing. You can't choose to do nothing. You can choose to continue that which you are doing, which is really to do nothing new, no novelty, or to do that which is not being done, which is adding novelty, doing something new, but that's creative. But you need determinism in order to even know whether or not a choice that you're making is going to be different, result in a different outcome than what is your current state. So you can't separate free will and determinism, actually. The entire question of how can there be both they're not in conflict, and they're not unrelated either. They are dependent. So it's important to know. But this was a great statement. This next one.
And just on the free will and physics thing, when you were talking, I just want to bring this up because I think it's a really interesting viewpoint that Nicholas Chizen has, that we want to use the laws of physics and then say you can't have free will. And his point is you have to have free will in order to even choose to set up an experiment to test the laws of physics. So in some sense, free will should be more fundamental than physics is, because to even do science, there's some assumption that the agents have free will. And I always thought it was really perplexing that, physics wants to remove agency, because the idea that I could do an experiment here on this part of Earth, and then I can move somewhere else and prepare an identically prepared experiment, run an experiment again, seems to imply something about the structure of our universe that is not encoded in the laws that we're testing in those experiments.
So this kind of dream of physics that you can do multiple experiments, different locations, and then validate.
Okay, she's perfectly correct. This is great. You can't divorce us from science, and as much as physics will kick and scream as people try as it tries to avoid consciousness or sentience or free will or God, which is all, if you realize, they're all variations of agency, like an agent, conscious agent, like Donald Hoffman's theory, conscious agent theory. That's what a sentient singularity is basically, it's like a conscious agent. Those are an intrinsic part of they are existence. They're not even a part of existence. They are existence. You cannot divorce science from free will. Otherwise, it's not science. You can't divorce us and agents from the laws and deterministic rules of the universe. You don't have to, though. And if you do, you will fail. Always. If you try and act like there's no determinism, there's and basically to say to believe in mathematical randomness is crazy. It will get you nowhere. You will misunderstand the entire universe. To believe that in no consciousness or no agency or no free will, which is the ability to choose whether or not you do that which is not being done or you continue to do that which you are doing. To disbelieve that you even have that choice will cause you to misunderstand the universe and existence itself, even beyond that. You can't keep these things separate. It's always made me laugh when I see people are like, what's the theory of everything? And then somebody goes and makes like an actual attempt at a theory of everything, and it's not just about uniting quantum mechanics and general relativity, which if you really understood what those the patterns that we call those things are, then you would know that they occur in many instances of existence, not just what you're thinking about in terms of, you know, that kind of, I don't think physics is very narrow, but that narrow niche. It's like, there's no there's no politics and morality without, like, a social science. And there is no social science without genealogy and lineage, basically lineage science. And there is no genetics without it. And there is no genealogy without biology and ecology. And there is no biology, or there's no ecology without biology. And there's no biology without, chemistry. There's no chemistry without physics. There's no physics without math. There's no math without will. Which means, like, there's no math outside of sentience. So you can't separate these things. It's Babylon. If you try and keep them separate, you're going to just babble on. Like, literally. But if you want a theory that unites the universe, then you have to be willing to merge the fields. And you have to be willing to watch others jump between fields and things like that. And not even jump between them, but transcend them. And that's why you see this, like, a chemist is working with a physicist who's kind of oddly like an astrobiologist, and then they're coming to the same conclusions as a computer scientist and a philosopher. There's no more lines going forward. That doesn't mean the lines aren't important. Lines are important. They are important when it comes to application. But when it comes to understanding, going forward, there's no more lines in science. Application, yes. Engineering, yes. But no, like, in terms of understanding the universe, you can't say, I want to understand the universe and then segment every aspect of it and keep them separate. That includes yourself. A theory of everything is not really, it doesn't really exist, but a theory of every0ne does exist. And that is like the transcendent pattern that is responsible for all the other patterns is sentience. So, Sara Walker also said that she didn't think that life started in like one puddle on Earth. I'm not going to show it because we got to get through this, but and that it was kind of like systemic in its generation, and basically they had an argument about Lee originally thought that life could emerge multiple times on a single planet, which I think even is a bad framework to think about this, but still. And her idea was that basically, like, that's not how it worked. It wasn't like in this puddle emerged life and in that puddle emerged life. It's like, as being totally separate. It's just life is emerging, but it's not even really that life is emerging because life didn't start at cells. So you could say cellular life emerges, but not like, it's not life. Life doesn't have a beginning. God is alive. Existence is a sentient being. It's alive. That's what life is. So the universe is a lineage of living beings, but that includes molecules and atoms. At a minimum, maybe hadrons, like protons and neutrons. I will say, though, that I do agree with Lee Cronin, as he said earlier. Electrons are not sentient beings, at least according to my work. They don't seem to be. But protons and neutrons do appear like they are. That doesn't mean they are. It means it appears like they are. That's the difference. And atoms do appear to be sentient, like even more so than hadrons, potentially. So, but not electrons. Electrons are just the perception of a wave of information interaction. So, but we're going to eventually talk about this as like, does life emerge twice on one planet? I think that's the wrong framework even. It's like, does life jump up a level in the periodicity on more than one instance in a time space? That is like a better that's the better framing of it, but we're not going to talk about it tonight. So the question is wrong, which is very similar to a lot of issues in science right now. Okay. Yeah, I really need to step on this, time-wise. This was something Sara Walker said, and I really appreciated it, again, because it's funny that, like, the men are all trying to create, like, an AGI, and she is, like, basically states, we won't have to create it.
Those feelings towards the robot, why is that robot? I mean, because you said like the AGI will build an AGI, but it won't. There'll be a fundamental difference in AGI.
I don't think we'll build it. It's going to emerge from our technology.
But I think you guys all argue the same thing. Yeah. I just said that GPT.
Yeah. Okay. It's going to emerge from our technology. That's true. That's just a fact. And let's see what else. Love. We'll do 2 more clips that are related. So what is love? And this is also coming up in a physics conversation.
In assembly space. I didn't think I'll be doing this today.
I can't wait till Assembly Theory 101 is taught, and the second lecture is Assembly Theory of Love.
No, but
it's being surprised. The expectation is being broken.
I'm not.
No, go for it.
I'm not an emotional being. But I would say, so let's talk. So we'll talk about emotion, but love is more complex. Love is a very complex set of emotions together and logical stuff. But if you've got this person that's on this causal chain that has this empathy for this other thing, love is being able to project ahead in your assembly space and work out what the person you're in love with has a need for, and to do that for them without selflessly, right? Because you can project ahead what they're going to need, and they are there, and then maybe you can see someone that's going to fall over, and you catch them before they fall over, or maybe you can anticipate that someone's going to be hungry, and without helping you just help them. That's what
that just sounds like empathy.
No, it's not empathy. Lex is wrong. Lex doesn't understand love, and I like Lex, but Lex talks about love all the time, and his definition is as a feeling always. But Lee is correct. Empathy is the feeling, or it is the perspective that generates feelings for others when you basically identify with their position. You can understand them as another sentient being with feelings, and so you put yourself into their shoes, and then you can kind of like interpret and extrapolate like what they are feeling, and then you feel a certain way for them because you know what it's like to be a sentient being that feels that certain way. That is empathy. Love is an action. You can feel loved when somebody makes dinner for you and you come home and your wife made you dinner and you're like, oh my gosh, I feel loved. But you don't You're not in love. There is no in love. This is a made up concept by the movies and book industry, because they needed a way to show people had like very, very strong emotions for each other and wanted to commit to each other, because but they couldn't do that in like 45 minutes or in one book, because it happens over a lifetime usually for people who are in love. It's like, you're in love, you get married, you spend a life together. I don't think people said I love you or I love that person 1,000 years ago the same way that they do now, because they didn't read about it. It's just you just knew it. You know, somebody married you and they were faithful to you and they took care of you when you were sick and they did nice things for you. You didn't need them to say, oh, I love you. Nowadays we put so much on it. We're like, oh, did he say that, the L word? It's like, did he say I love you? Did he say it back? This is an idol, and it's not useful, because then what happens when you don't have those feelings anymore? You get divorced, and that's not love. That means you were in it for you. Selflessness is an aspect of love, like Lee said. If you get married because you like somebody, and then when you don't like somebody, you get divorced, then marriage is not an act of love of them. Maybe of yourself, but not of them. And I don't even think that is loving yourself. You don't really love yourself. You can like love the assembly that is within you, your cells or something, by taking care of yourself, but you can't love you. I think that is like, oh, self-love. I think that's just not a helpful concept, because self-love means like, if it makes love no longer anything that is like linked to doing nice things for other people. It's just like, I'm good to myself. It's like, congratulations. Everybody should kind of be like that. But love is an action to help someone with something that you can anticipate, basically. It is always an action. To get married and stay married, that is to love. To get married when you're in love does not happen. It's just infatuation, or like you really, really like them. And there's nothing wrong with that. But there is no such thing as being in love. There isn't. There is just a such thing as loving. To love someone is a real thing. It is an action, though. And you can feel when others do it to you, but you cannot be in love. Lex is wrong. But I've taken issue with it before. And like I said, I like Lex a lot. I'm very grateful that he did this 4-hour long interview with these people and all the other ones that he does. But this is not correct, to be in love. And then let's look at one final clip. Basically, this is about like lineage structures again.
Not only could we measure, but we can then start to quantify the causal consequences. Because, I mean, you know, I think as a kind of inventing this together with Sarah and her team, I thought there was quite a high chance that, you know, we're doing science. There's such a high probability we're wrong.
Mm-hmm.
You know, on
Every day.
this, and I remember kind of trying to go to hard physicists, mathematicians, complexity theorists, and everyone just kind of giving me such a hard time about it. I said, you know, you've just done this, you've just done that. It's you know, you've just recapitulated an old theory, and I was unable. I lacked the language to really explain, and I had to. It was a real struggle. So this realization that what life does, that physics cannot understand, or chemistry, is the universe develops a memory that's causally actionable, and then we can measure it, but it isn't just one thing. There is this intrinsic property of all the objects in the universe, like I've said before. But you know, me holding up this water bottle is just any other water bottle, but it is a sum total of all the water bottles that have existed, right?
No.
And will likely change the future of water bottles. and for other objects. So it's this kind of, so for me, assembly theory explains the soul in stuff.
The monadology.
But it is, as monadology, it's not like Sheldrake's morphic resonance where we have this kind of wooey.
Okay, very, very good, but also a bit off. Okay, when she says monadology, like this is about like discretizing things into single packets. It's not about the water bottle. Okay, changing things for other water bottles. This is where he's struggling, I think, and it's you are being changed by the water bottle. Okay, you are the packet of discretized information, not the water bottle. The water bottle is an experience inside you as the packet of information that is part of a lineage process. That water bottle is not part of a lineage. It's part of a subjective, like relativistic lineage kind of iterations, but there's no actual, like outside of sentience, there's no even definition to a water bottle outside of a human being defining a water bottle. So there's no discretization to water bottles outside of humans that are discretized into a lineage objectively because they are themselves observers and therefore objectively exist, not subjectively. Like, water bottle doesn't exist to something that doesn't, like, use this as a water bottle. It's just a clump of molecules. You are the individual in the lineage in assembly theory. And assembly theory seems to be very, very linked to, I mean, not just seems to be, it is very linked to my work. My abstract says we are an assembly of other sentient beings. That those sentient beings each are the saved states, and in the states that the information that each one of their sentiences contains, that is about how that is even defined by their relationship to other sentient beings, either that come after them, come before them, or existed with them. So it's because ultimately you have to, this monadology, as she said, you have to discretize it. It has to be broken into singular packets. Okay? You have to quantize the universe. And in order to do that, objectively, not subjectively, like as in this is one water bottle, but like as in there's a lineage of structures that make up, that thing that we call the water bottle, which would be like the molecules in it and the atoms within that and the hadrons within that. And even the universe, the preceding universe that made this one, that one exists, that bottle kind of exists in, but it's not even the bottle exists in this universe. It's like we exist in this universe and that bottle exists from our perspective in the universe. It exists in us, the water bottle. It doesn't actually, like, it exists in our experiences. But it only exists also as a kind of like to show an interaction between us and someone else. Someone made this. And now I have it. That information went from them to me. It's not in the water bottle. It never was. The water bottle is the information. There's no information in the water bottle. There's an information is going from someone else to me, and also to these molecules that have now been like put into some assembly structure for, hydrocarbons like plastics. But there's no information outside of interactions in the universe, basically outside of the interactions of sentient beings. Essentially, it's not there. It's that water bottle he's holding is not part of a lineage that's objective. Subjective, sure. Objective, no. If objective assembly structure of the universe, sentient beings, living beings. Okay. I know I said last clip, but this is probably the last one. There's two left that I want to talk about real quick after this one.
Just from, things like the interaction of massive bodies, or that charges accelerate, or all these kind of features. And they're these really deep theories, and they tell us a lot about how reality works, but they're completely agnostic to our existence. And I can't help but think that, like, whatever describes us has to be even deeper than that.
And I think incorporating memory, I guess,
Yeah.
or causality, whatever the term you want to use, into the physics view of the world might be.
That's the easiest way to do it. It's the cleanest. So here we go again with the physicist. I'm a physicist. I was going to say the simplest, most elegant way of resolving all of the kind of ways that we have these paradoxes associated with life. It's not that life is not current physics is not incompatible with life, but it doesn't explain life. And then you want to know, where are the explanatory gaps? And this idea that we have an assembly, that time is fundamental, and objects actually are extended in time and have physical extent in time, is the cleanest way of resolving a lot of the explanatory gaps.
So I struggled with assembly theory for many years because I could see this gap. And I think when I first met Sarah and we realized we were kind of talking about the same problem, but we understood none of the language. It was quite hilarious, actually, because it's like...
Okay. So, yeah. You can't divorce sentience. Sentience is what's primary, actually. It's what is fundamental to everything. But yes, time is a time-space, which is like moment, which is more of a fundamental perspective than like space time, which is but it's all actually the same thing. It's just looking at it from two different perspectives, but those perspectives are from the perspectives of the interaction between sentient beings. Cells see space-time, okay, basically, that we generate. And we see the time space that cells are within, essentially. Like I said earlier, I am picking up this water bottle. The cells are like, okay, we all have to move in this, way around each other to make sure that we can, they're moving around each other to maneuver what their universe is doing, which is picking up a water bottle, but they don't see that. So this is also happening to us. We are cells inside of a universe, which is a sentient being. And this is the cleanest way to do this. When you put sentience as the primary nature and structure and building block of the universe, all these paradoxes get resolved. Everything becomes intuitive. All these questions of like free will versus determinism. It's like, that seems like an unanswerable, never-ending question, but it's a non-question in sentient singularity theory. And I'm not saying their theory's wrong or anything. I don't think that. I think their theory's right. I think they have a little bit of work to do with contextualizing it, but I have a lot of work to do with writing, with applying and specifying and things like that. That a lot of people who are more just advanced and or they're just further along in their mathematical and academic, I guess, like scientific journey. But at the same time, context is important. And this does my reframing of assembly theory into this monadology of each discrete singularity in the assembly being a sentience resolves all the problems and questions that they seem to have, I think. At least, like, not all of the questions, but a lot of the questions that would come from, trying to quantize the changes in water bottles or something like that. You're going to see some more relativity there. You can't say that it's harder to show that the water bottle is has a time kind of, because it doesn't experience time, you do. The molecules in it do, but not, they have no concept of like what a water bottle is. You have a concept of a water bottle. And the final thing that basically comes up in this interview is, like, they're asked, like, what scares you, I think, and Sara Walker says, or what is your greatest fear, or something like that. Sara Walker says, the scariest movie to me is Children of Men, is what she says. And I've actually brought this up on our streams on here too, as well, as like one of the scariest movies in the world. And what this shows is that meaning comes from the ability to impact others, and that eventually, due to entropy, in order to have more meaning, you need more others. And whether it's conscious or not, recognizing the end of the generation of sentience, of sentient beings, of multiplicity of sentient beings, as kind of the end of everything important, shows like an understanding of this next level of physics that incorporates meaning and sentience and things like that, and lineages and all these concepts that we talked about. It's it's not that the scariest movie is like Deep Impact or like Armageddon. It's like, oh, everybody dies, I don't want to die. That sounds not fun. There's so many things I wanted to do. Much scarier concept is like, there's no meaning left to our lives and we're still here, but we know that there's no more meaning. That's what gets at, like, why did God create the universe? So he was alone and meaningless. That sounds horrible. That's like Children of Men, but like the worst like extreme of that. There's nothing painful about Children of Men. Nobody's getting tortured. It's not jump scary. It's scary in that it causes you to confront like meaning and the lack of it, and where it comes from, what would cause it to stop. That is, when you think about God and the universe and everything we talked about tonight, that is a much scarier concept. There's much scarier than pain is like meaninglessness. Anyways, that's that, guys. Like I said, please like this, share it, subscribe if you haven't. I know this was long. I really appreciate everybody sticking it out. I will put timestamps below this later tonight, but if you want to watch the entirety of the stream that we discussed, highly recommend clicking on the link below to Lex's 4-hour and 5-minute stream of these two. I would love to get one of them or both of them at some point on this channel for an interview. I actually did request a paper from Sara Walker once, but I don't know if I did it right, or I did not hear back so far as I know, but it would be great to have one of them on here and just discuss these concepts and their relationship with science moving forward and why it's such a struggle to like embrace these things. But with that, if you want to participate in our Discord discussion, which is an open call this Thursday at 7 p.m. Pacific time, on anything that anybody wants to talk about, it goes on for hours and it's always a great talk with people. Send me a private message on Instagram and I will send you the link for it. If you'd like to support this project on Patreon, link is in the description below. I really could use a new, faster computer. And if you would like to know more information on sentient singularity theory, the link is also in the description below. I will be releasing a paper pretty soon, as I've stated, and it's definitely getting closer to being done. But with that, if I don't see or talk to you